Philosophy of History, Part 7. How do you know that? That's an important question to ask when you're studying, not just history, but any subject as you're learning, you're studying facts, you're studying opinions, interpretations. It's important to consider that idea. How do you know what you know? Where do you get your information? What sources do you use? How critically or uncritically do you view your sources? Do you just swallow everything hook, line, and sinker? Do you question and understand biases? How do you know that? And this is important as a historian or a student of history. When you discuss your point of view, you argue your point of view. Are you saying just something you heard? Are you basing it off of primary documents? Is it just somebody's opinion that you're repeating? It's important to consider those things. And when you look at sources, you ask questions of your sources. What are the biases? What's the purpose of the source? When was it written? How close to the source is it? Is it a sympathetic source or a critical source? And also, the other thing to look at is your source out of context? If one example, I there's quotes I saw this quote once in a textbook by I guess someone that was financially stable during the 1930s. Said, well, what do you mean depression? And you know what I mean? Like, you could, not everyone was suffering during the 1930s economically. You know what I mean? I could put together 20 quotes, and make it look like no, everyone's fine in the 1930s, kind of a thing. And so that's why you want to look at context. You want to look at biases. What's the general trend? Are your sources a subset of the larger culture? How do you know what you know? Where do you get your information? Are you in an intellectual bubble? Do you only read sources you agree with? Do you only go to news sources you agree with? That would be an issue too. How do you know that? How do you know what you know? Well, if everything you read, you already agree with, that might be an issue. Think about this. Think about the last time you read something or saw something and you sat and listened and read it legitimately that you disagreed with. If it's not very often or if it's very rarely, then maybe you should expand your horizons, get out of your intellectual bubble. We all do that. We all kind of put ourselves in an intellectual bubble and then think that we know it. I know it. I know things. I know everything. How do you know that? What I mean? If you're just repeating, what somebody else says and you haven't really studied it personally, you may want to do that. For example, another example, I'm not an expert on the history of Ukraine or Russia. Russia and Ukraine. I'm not an expert on Ukraine or Russia. Right? So how do I know what I know? Well, it comes from what other historians or other commentators have said. You know what I mean? And so I have to look at my sources. Well, who, are they experts? Do they know what they're talking about, kind of a thing. So that's another example does your knowledge come from your own study, or are you just repeating what other people say, kind of a thing.